Hello and welcome to another episode of Sci-Fi-Night Top 5. Of course, happy Halloween everybody, and in this special installment, we're counting down our top 5 favorite horror franchises. So there is certainly no shortage of horror movies, and many of the best and well-known movies have had whole franchises dedicated to them throughout the years. And that is why we are listing our top 5 favorite horror franchises. Now, a little bit of criteria is that it's going to have to be the strength of the overall franchise itself, including both the good and the bad entries, so that will definitely make things a little bit more interesting. But as we all do have our Halloween traditions, I have mine as well, and I would not be doing a Halloween top 5 without my good buddy, Joseph Ari.
Can you believe it, man? It's another annual Halloween crossover. We started that tradition 5 years ago, and boy oh boy, we're still young at heart, even though we've gotten old, man. But we're still in love with the holiday season, and especially this year around where we can't really go outside. It's important for us to celebrate Halloween on our channel so we can keep this tradition alive.
All these traditions.
And once again, a big shout out to the Sci-Fi-Night community. Thanks for having me again.
So with that said, I'll kick off my top 5 list, but first, a couple honorable mentions. The Purge series, the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and the Final Destination series. Alright, so first off we got the Purge series, 4 movies and 2 seasons of a TV show, and they're all kind of surprisingly good at what they're trying to do. I mean, let's face it, it's action horror exploitation at its most exploitative. But that's also kind of exactly what they set out to do. And honestly, pretty much all the Purge movies are all a fun, energetic, bloody time, which is exactly what we're trying to accomplish. So in that sense, I give the Purge series major props for doing everything they're actually trying to. Like I said, once again, none of these are great movies. I mean, they're fun, bloody flicks, but that's also why they're not in my top 5. Still though, I have such a fun time every time I revisit the Purge series, and that's why it's an honorable mention.
Here they come.
My second honorable mention goes to the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and this might be a little bit controversial, but hear me out. Look, I love the first and third movie, but that's kind of it. I feel like a lot of the sequels are actually pretty damn bad, and they just make Freddy into a joke.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul, too!
I'm also not a huge fan of Wes Craven's New Nightmare, even though it's alright, but overall, I only truly like the first and third films, and the rest are from silly to just flat out terrible. Still though, Freddy Krueger is a horror icon for very good reason, which is why he appeared on our top 5 list last year, but overall, I just couldn't give the whole franchise itself a top 5 spot.
Please, God.
This is God.
Finally, we've got the Final Destination series, and once again, not really Oscar material. None of the films are actually truly fantastic, but they all do exactly what they set out to. I mean, the Final Destination films have almost become a bit of a subgenre of horror themselves.
You're dead! And you ain't taking me with you!
Much like the Purge movies, they're basically just a fun, energetic, bloody times, movies that you watch for the kills, and they very seldom disappoint. I mean, in my opinion, you could put on this whole series and you would probably have a pretty fun-ass time from start to finish.
In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes.
Regarding your honorable mentions, I love the Final Destination series. I've never seen a single Purge movie. I know, but that's the reality of the situation. Personally, I don't have a single honorable mention. The only franchise that I could think of that would qualify as an honorable mention would be the Living Dead franchise by George A. Romero. But since it's been way too long since I've seen these films, I don't even know how many of them are actually good and how many of them are only mediocre. I love Night of the Living Dead, I love Dawn of the Dead, I even love Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake. But that's where it ends for me. I can't remember the other films, which is why I didn't put them on. Other than that, I'm really proud of my list. But you know what? Kick it off with your number 5.
Alright, so with the honorable mentions out of the way, that brings me to my number 5 spot, which goes to the Insidious series. Alright, so I'm just gonna go out and say it. In my opinion, the Insidious series is one of the best horror franchises of the last 20 years. Originally helmed by James Wan, who is now himself a staple of the horror genre, Insidious debuted with a lot of mystery behind it, and man, do I just love the way these films progress. They connect into each other nicely, they're minimalistic but still very creative. I just feel like they use so many really cool old school techniques for crafting the horrific scenes that have become so famous over the years. Yeah, like, you might not actually remember this, but most of these films are actually rated PG-13, and these still scare the crap out of us.
There was something in there with him. It was standing there in the corner.
Yeah, I remember watching the first Insidious in the theater, and man did it scare me. I was actually caught off guard at how surprisingly well crafted everything was. And while not every single entry in the 4-film franchise is a classic, but overall I'd say they hold a pretty damn good tone and quality throughout. So this might just be me, but for some reason I just love the fact that these films feel a little bit more old school in the way they're constructed and shot. As mentioned, there's a lot of simplicity to the filmmaking. While there are some digital effects, it's not just a one big CGI extravaganza. There is a lot of heart and hard work that went into the making of these films. They're all well acted, well directed, everything looks and sounds great, and overall, the Insidious franchise is one of the most pleasant surprises to reach the genre in the past 20 years. Alright, so that's my number 5 spot, but Joseph Ari, tell us, what's your number 5 spot and what do you think about the Insidious series?
Truth be told, I haven't seen a single Insidious movie. I know, and I've been meaning to watch Insidious 1 for Halloween, but I couldn't find it anywhere, so I guess I'm gonna watch it in November. But yeah, from what I've heard, this is a pretty consistently good franchise. So yeah, I've been meaning to check it out. Just didn't have the time, but glad it made your list. You know, it makes the sum of our list so much more diversified. Which brings me to my number 5.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Number 5. Halloween. And I know this entry could be considered controversial, but hear me out. There's a reason why I was uncertain to even put it on that list, and there's a very good reason why I ended up putting it on my list. First of all, I think as a franchise, Halloween is kind of a mixed bag. I've spent the last couple of weeks watching every single Halloween movie, and I gotta say, most of these movies suck. In particular, Rob Zombie's remakes, but I also hated The Curse of Michael Myers and Season of the Witch, apart from, you know it, you know the song. You're probably gonna hear the song by the end of the video, but other than that, I didn't like that film either. So why did this series make my list? Well, because in my humble opinion, there are 4 above average Halloween movies. Some of these films have become a tradition for me. Like the original by John Carpenter, I watch every single year. The 2018 sequel was surprisingly good. That was a legit sequel. Halloween 2 is, in my humble opinion, one of the most underrated horror sequels. And H20. Now that's a film of my generation. I mean, it was released in the vein of Scream and Scream 2, and Scream 2, funny enough, is even mentioned and referenced in the film because that's what they're watching while they're at home preparing for their Halloween party. So I relate to this film. And Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, is kind of a guilty pleasure for me, which is why I like 5 of these films and I love 4 of these films. This is why it made my list. Obviously, Michael Myers is an icon for the holiday season and for the horror genre in general. He is evil incarnate. Laurie Strode is the mother of all Scream Queens. And Dr. Loomis is a fascinating character that they kept on bringing back. We must not forget about the iconic theme song and the many great moments we were blessed with. So yeah, all in all, it does deserve a spot on my list, but due to so many shitty sequels, it only made number 5. But now I'm really interested in your number 4 spot.
Oh man, I totally get having the Halloween series on your list. It really makes sense, and it would probably be a shame if none of us had it. Now, as you mentioned, not all the films are great. In fact, some of them are pretty terrible. I mean, remember Busta Rhymes?
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
Yeah, seriously, who the hell thought that was a good idea? Still though, let's face it, the first film is a beloved classic, and for good reason. The direct sequel is criminally underrated, and while you're not a huge fan, I actually really love Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, though I will admit it's not a great film. It's hardly even a good film, but in my opinion it's a really, really fun film. I also feel like Halloween 4 is way better than people give it credit for, and I think we all have pretty positive feelings to Halloween H2O, another film that was surprisingly good. Alright, so that brings us to my number 4 spot, which goes to the Friday the 13th franchise. Yeah, those who have followed my channel probably saw this coming somewhere on the list. I mean, I am a huge fan of Friday the 13th. I love Crystal Lake, I love Jason Voorhees, and I just love the franchise as a whole, too. Though, I mean, let's face it, this is pretty high up on the list, and that is because there are so many really shitty sequels. Jason Goes to Hell, Jason 5, Jason Takes Manhattan, they're all pretty damn bad. And in many ways, even part 3 is actually kind of dull. Still though, parts 4 and 6 usually trade places amongst fans as the overall best of the series. The first one, while admittedly kind of a ripoff of Halloween in some ways, it still holds up as a fantastic slasher. Also, I'm usually not one to talk this way about remakes of beloved classics, but I actually loved the Friday the 13th remake that we got a couple years ago. Yeah, I mean, believe me, I'm just as surprised as you guys are. I thought I was gonna hate it, but I actually really liked the direction they took with the film.
And today is his birthday.
I mean, Jason Voorhees is such an iconic character. I feel like he truly became some kind of mythical monster in part 6, and whereas part 4 is the indefinite and in some ways perfect Friday the 13th film. Yeah, I mean, when you watch these movies, you kind of know what you're gonna get, and you know what? That's not always a bad thing. You know what you're gonna get, and that is Jason Voorhees killing off horny teens, and boy do we love it. Jason has since become one of, if not the most famous horror icon throughout film history, and in my opinion, the Friday the 13th franchise just cuts down most of its competition.
You're angry. What happened, man? Where did it all begin?
Alright, so that does it for my number 4 spot. Joseph Ari, what do you think about it? And tell us about yours.
Friday the 13th, huh? Well, I'm kind of a Jason fan myself, and everything you just said, I agree with. But you know what? I'm gonna stop right here for obvious reasons, because let's talk about my number 4. Number 4. Friday the 13th. Yep. I mean, it had to happen. Funny enough, it both made our number 4. But I gotta say, Friday the 13th is one of the most fun horror franchises out there. Not every single movie is great, and I don't even think there's a single amazing Friday the 13th film, but as a franchise, it's just so much fun. They went crazier and crazier as they went along. And the funny thing is they knew. They were very self-referential about the development of the series.
Darren, we better turn around.
Why?
Because I've seen enough horror movies to know any weirdo wearing a mask is never friendly.
By part 6, Jason is an unstoppable rage monster and an undead warrior. Amazing. My personal favorites have always been part 4 and part 6. Part 4 because it has the best pacing, and if you're looking for an old school slasher, that's your perfect old school trashy slasher because it has the best kills, the best pacing, surprisingly good acting by Corey Feldman, and an iconic Jason. My number 1 spot will always be Jason Lives because of the self-referential humor, because of the mood, the atmosphere, and the direction in general. But I also like Jason X because it's so stupid and over the top. I have a soft spot for Freddy vs. Jason. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. And the only Friday the 13th film that I downright hated was part 9. Jason Goes to Hell, where he's this parasite. That was dumb, but overall, even the remake was legit. So Jason is one of the greatest slasher killers of all time, and you're kind of rooting for him because he's so creative in the way he kills people. So yeah, we got the same number 4, but how about your number 3?
Oh man, I love it. It feels like every time we do one of these kinds of lists, we always have one spot that's the same despite the kind of list we're doing. Anyway, I already said what I think about the 13th franchise, so let's just move on to my number 3 spot, which might surprise some people, but it goes to the Exorcist series. Oh, hell yeah. So when The Exorcist first came out in 1973, it was seen by many at the time as the scariest film ever made. And you know what? It probably was in 1973.
Who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Lord, hear my prayer.
Since then, we've received 4 additional films in the franchise, 2 sequels and 2 prequels, and it actually gets a little bit convoluted there. While Exorcist 2 and 3 are pretty straightforward sequels, the 2 prequels, Exorcist the Beginning and Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, are actually kind of the same film? Yeah, you heard that right. 2 different prequels that actually started off as the same movie. So basically what happened was that they filmed what would become Dominion, but decided to change it and reshoot several parts, then releasing it as Exorcist the Beginning. When that bombed at the box office, they decided to release the original version of the prequel, Dominion, which also wasn't very great. I mean, in my opinion, if you kind of combine the 2 films, I do feel like there is a good film to be salvaged between it. It just wasn't done properly. While neither of the films is particularly good, I do actually like a lot of the stuff, and it's cool seeing Stellan Skarsgård as a young Father Merrin. So why is the Exorcist franchise so high on my list despite a lot of the films not being particularly great? I'm looking at you, part 2. Well, basically, it's all on the strength of the first and third films. Yeah, let's face it, The Exorcist is a classic. It is a hallmark horror film, a truly legendary picture that will always be in the discussion of the best and scariest horror films of all time. And adding to that, 1990's The Exorcist 3, written by William Peter Blatty, who actually wrote the original Exorcist novel, is an honestly fantastic film. Yeah, for real, if you guys haven't seen it, you are definitely missing out. It is a truly brilliant psychological horror film with lots of horror elements to it, especially towards the end. Yeah, I really don't want to spoil anything because I feel like there's so many people who haven't seen The Exorcist 3 and given it the credit it deserves. But basically, it follows a recast police detective from the first film who seems to be connected to a serial killer called the Gemini Killer. But then obviously, this being an Exorcist film, there are some very spooky and devilish things added onto it. As the main suspect, played fantastically by Brad Dourif, seems to be way more than just your run-of-the-mill serial killer.
The Gemini is dead.
No, I am not! I'm alive! I go on! I breathe! Look at me!
Look at me and tell me what you see.
I cannot stress how fantastic everything in this film is. It's a slow burn quality picture with fantastic action, surprising editing that in my opinion is very good in the way that it keeps you off guard and sort of keeps you on edge. And just overall everything in this film comes together fantastically.
But come in, Father Morning. Enter, night.
Yeah, like while I will say that the 1973 original The Exorcist is probably the better and more well-crafted overall film, I probably personally prefer The Exorcist 3 over the first one. Whoa. So yeah, I've mostly talked about The Exorcist 3 simply because, I mean, what is there to be said of the first Exorcist that hasn't already? It's a legendary film that truly laid the standard for what horror cinema could be, and Part 3 followed it up fantastically. It is such a shame that more people haven't seen it because I truly think that it is a real gem out there that a lot of people haven't discovered. The Exorcist Part 2, The Heretic, is laughably bad. As I mentioned, the two prequels, or I guess one prequel made in two different ways, don't really work. But overall, the strength of the first and third film are just so unbearably high. They are both just such fantastically well-made films that I had to have it close to the top. So that does it for my number 3 spot. What do you think, Joseph Ari? And tell us about yours.
Very interesting choice, and truth be told, I've only ever watched the original because the original is such a genuine classic that I was afraid that the sequels would ruin it for me. But now that it made your list and all of your arguments, you know what? I'm gonna check them out because, as I said, I adored the original. And if the sequels are still good or at least passable, I'm gonna check them out. So thanks for the recommendation, my friend. But now it's time for my number 3.
Live or die. The choice is yours.
Number 3, Saw. Look, I love the Saw franchise. I mean, I think I've been praising this franchise every single year since we've started this tradition. And a lot of people out there think that it's just about blood and guts and that it's a gore fest or torture porn. I've never considered the Saw franchise to be torture porn. Hostel is torture porn. The Human Centipede is torture porn. Saw to me is still a murder mystery and a thriller, a crime thriller, a psychological thriller. Yes, it is very bloody. Yes, it is very gory. But the character of Jigsaw alone makes the franchise for me. I think he is the single most fascinating horror antagonist. I think the only real competition he has is Dr. Hannibal Lecter, and you can't beat Dr. Hannibal Lecter. But in terms of long-lasting franchises, Jigsaw is my absolute number 1. The difference between Jigsaw and all the other killers is the fact that he views himself as the hero of the story. And throughout the series, you start to empathize with him. You don't condone his actions, but you understand where the guy is coming from. My personal favorites, Part 1, of course, that's a legit classic. Even the people that hate the franchise tend to like Part 1, but I also very much enjoy Part 2, and especially Part 4. That's almost as good as the original, if not slightly better. I don't know. Part 4 is a very, very good sequel. But in general, I believe the 4th installment within horror franchises tends to be good. Friday the 13th Part 4 is considered the best among many fans. Saw 4 is great. And yeah, there's another franchise that I'm not going to mention right now, but I will get to it. So that was my number 3. How about your number 2?
I knew it. I mean, obviously, you're probably the biggest Saw fan that I know, and I am not surprised to see it on your list. Yeah, you've already made really great points, and I can't really disagree with any of them. I mean, for me personally, I'm just not really as into the Saw series. I do feel like I kind of mix them up a little bit and they blend together. However, there are a lot of really good scenes and moments throughout the franchise.
Mr. Mason, come on! Listen to me. Mr. Mason, I am the one who should live.
And with so many films, that leaves us with a hell of a lot of grisly, bloody goodness to enjoy.
You don't know me, but I know you. I want to play a game.
There certainly is a lot of creativity throughout the series. I mean, the traps are usually pretty damn interesting. And even in some of the shittier movies, the traps always are a highlight. So while I don't personally have the Saw series on the list, I completely understand why you do.
Game over.
Alright, that brings us to my number 2 spot, which goes to the Evil Dead franchise. Yeah, here we are in another case of a horror franchise being kind of surprisingly great throughout. So far there have been 3 original movies and 1 remake of the first film, and in my opinion they all hold up pretty damn well. The weakest out of the series would actually probably be the very first film, which is unusual. One thing that I think is really cool too about the 4 films is that while 3 out of 4 take place in the cabin out in the woods, they all kind of have a different feel to them. Yeah, the first one is a little bit B-movie.
4 of hearts, 8 of spades, 2 spades, jack of diamonds, jack of clubs.
The second is horror comedy with a bit of emphasis on the horror. And the third one is like a horror comedy adventure.
For that arrogance, I shall see you dead. Yeah.
While the remake of the original film reverts back to just straight up bloody horror. In my opinion, they're all very well made. The character of Ash has also become pretty much legendary in horror circles, and the Evil Dead series overall is just flat out a great time to be had by all. Unless you're being possessed by one of the Deadites, that is.
I fear that the only way to stop those possessed by the spirits of the book is through the act of bodily dismemberment.
Alright, so that's my number 2 spot. Tell us about yours.
Oh, isn't that interesting? The Evil Dead franchise, really. I'm a huge fan of the Evil Dead movies. I love them all, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm gonna stop talking right now for obvious reason, but I'm glad it made your list because to me, the Evil Dead is the definition of a passion project. What Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell created with each installment is amazing, ridiculous, fun, gory, bloody, scary, entertaining. It's all of it, and I love this franchise to death. Which brings me to my number 2.
I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Number 2, Scream. I recently rewatched the entire Scream series, and the funny thing about that is, remember when we did our very first special, I had Scream on my top 5 favorite Halloween movies. And both of us agreed that the sequels weren't that great. You know what? Now looking back at the sequels, I like every single entry within the Scream franchise. Yeah, the first one is still unparalleled, but in particular Part 4 is amazing. Part 2 was great, and you know what? Part 3 is hands down the worst. I think most fans would agree with me on that one, but again, it's not a terrible movie, it's just not as good as the others. It went a little too far with the meta humor, but it's still a very enjoyable film. And when I think of all the low points of the Halloween franchise or the Friday the 13th franchise, Scream 3, that's not a terrible movie, it's just not as good as the others. What I really love about Scream, first of all, is the murder mystery aspect, because we never know who Ghostface is. There's a new Ghostface every single movie, so part of the fun is trying to figure out who the killer is. The second thing that I love are all the meta references. The fact that they are so aware of horror movie tropes in general, movie rules in general, that is amazing.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
And our 3 leads are fantastic. Sidney Prescott, I'm sorry Laurie Strode, but Sidney Prescott will forever be my Scream Queen. She develops with every single movie. She evolves as a character, and I even loved her in the first one. Gale Weathers, played by Courtney Cox, amazing character, snarky, hilarious, but also kind of badass, sometimes kind of a dick, but I love her. And Dewey, lovable idiot, yet badass sheriff by the end of part 4. I love these three characters. I'm so glad they're bringing them all back for part 5. Scream has become a genuine Halloween tradition for me, and I love this franchise with a passion. So that was my number 2. Tell me about your number 1. You know what? I can understand it. I was thinking about putting Scream as my number 1 spot. I love this franchise so much. Everything about it works. The fact that it's the perfect blend of satire and legit horror slasher. The fact that the kills are actually creative. The fact that they make use of creepy stalker vibes with all the phone calls and prank calls. Amazing stuff. And the characters are surprisingly well written, especially for a slasher franchise. Well acted as well. I mean, Courtney Cox, Neve Campbell, and David Arquette, they kill it in all of these films. So I totally understand. And this is one of these franchises with a great consistency of quality. They were able to hold the quality, and that's a rarity, especially in horror.
Oh, the Scream series is a great choice, but it could have been greater because guess what? My number 1 spot goes to the Scream franchise. Yeah, once again, I actually kind of surprised myself here, but as I said in the beginning of the video, we are judging by the strength of the overall franchise as a whole, and in my opinion, the 4 Scream films are actually pretty damn solid, all of them. Now yes, I know, the third one kind of is the black sheep out of a bunch. It definitely is the worst out of the series. But even at that, I feel like every single entry into the Scream franchise adds a little bit something to the overall mythology. Each one adds something a little bit cool and interesting, and every single film holds up as a classic whodunit scenario.
Hello?
Hello, Sydney. Remember me?
What do you want?
I want you.
I think at this point we can all pretty much appreciate how influential and important the first Scream film was, and I just think it's such a shame that a lot of people seem to be overlooking the sequels as well. Again, surprising myself, I was not thinking that Scream 4 would be particularly good, but it's seen by many as the second best film in the series.
What's your favorite scary movie, Olivia?
It's the worst imitation I've ever heard, Jill.
I probably prefer Scream 2 over Scream 4, but it is really close and hard to choose in my opinion.
The way I see it, someone's out to make a sequel, so it's our job to observe the rules of the sequel.
I just really like the character of Sidney Prescott and the changes that her character goes through throughout the series. Sure, admittedly, none of the films are flawless, and there are points where it seems that the killers were kind of injecting themselves into the Sidney Prescott story on sort of flimsy ground, but overall I'd say everything just works really damn well in every single one of the films.
Alright, how's the movie?
What movie?
Shaun of the Dead.
How did you know that?
Because I'm standing in the closet.
Stop, you are not.
Also, similarly to Evil Dead, there is a great element of humor in the Scream series.
I'll be right back. You know this when you're not supposed to say that, are you?
That is another thing too that people forget. That the satirical tone of the first film actually really influenced so many other films out there, from Friday the 13th to A Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, that's right, Scream 1 basically changed things. It changed the way the horror films were made. Yeah, the sort of self-referential stuff and the meta humor, none of that was really truly present in mainstream horror before the Scream series came along.
You guys should get out too! It's crazy to still be here!
Wes Craven obviously has a fantastic eye for horror, but in my opinion, I feel like he really went above and beyond with the first Scream, striking a fantastic balance between satirical humor and terrifying horror. Alright, so that's my number 1 spot, but let's kick it off with your final entry.
But that brings me to my number 1.
It is through the recitation of the book's passages that this dark spirit is given license to possess
the living.
Number 1, The Evil Dead. Yep, I had to do it. The Evil Dead franchise is my favorite horror franchise of all times due to its creativity and due to its originality. Everything about this franchise works. The first film is a legit gore fest. It is super bloody, but also so cleverly shot. What Sam Raimi was able to do with no budget whatsoever was amazing. It did have some involuntary comedy, but you know what? They made up for this with Part 2, because Part 2 is one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and it might just be one of my all-time favorite movies. Evil Dead 2 is the perfect blend of comedy and horror. It's still super gory, and it established a character that is unlike every single character we've ever had in a horror movie. Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams is so terrific. You would see a guy like that in a Three Stooges skit or in an 80s action flick, not in a horror movie. And the combination of super bloody gore horror and Ash Williams shouldn't work. On paper, this shouldn't work, but on screen it does. Army of Darkness is a fantasy epic, and yet it works again. And we must not forget about the remake. It's actually a pretty legit horror remake, which once again, doesn't happen very often in Hollywood, but I did enjoy the rawness, gore aspects, and the legit horror of the remake. But I also adored the continuation of the franchise with Ash vs. Evil Dead, which has become one of my all-time favorite TV shows.
Groovy.
I think that show is a masterpiece because it combined all the elements from all the previous films. It has Ash Williams from Army of Darkness, it has the gore and violence from the first Evil Dead film, and it has the horror aspect and playfulness of Part 2. Ash vs. Evil Dead is a must-see. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor, especially in times where every single franchise is ruined by sequels that are released 20 years later. I'm of course talking about The Last Jedi or The Predator. Ash vs. Evil Dead and Cobra Kai are the two sequels that managed to capture what was awesome about the originals while adding something new. I love Evil Dead. It has become a tradition to at least watch Evil Dead 2 and Ash vs. Evil Dead throughout October. It's my favorite horror franchise, and of course it deserves to be my number 1 spot.
I love it. Again, really close with our number 1 and 2 spots, and we had Friday the 13th as the same as well. And what can I really say that neither of us haven't already said about the Evil Dead series? As of now, the Evil Dead franchise still stands as a fantastic testament to the passion of the horror genre that creator Sam Raimi had. And from TV series to video games to musicals, the Evil Dead franchise will continue to live on in the heart of us horror fans. So yeah, what else can I say? That was a great choice for your number 1 spot, buddy, and it's always a pleasure to have you around.
Thank you so much for having me, Sebastian. Once again, it was a blast. I'm looking forward to much more of these. I love these collaborations. Thank you so much. Love you, buddy. You and your viewers have a happy Halloween. Enjoy the holiday season, because I most definitely will. Bye-bye.
Alright, so that about does it for this episode of Sci-Fi-Night and Joseph Ari Top 5. We hope you enjoyed it. Happy Halloween to everybody out there, and once again a huge thank you to Joseph Ari. I love doing these Halloween top 5 lists with you. It will continue to be an annual tradition as well. Once again, happy Halloween everybody, and we'll catch you guys next time.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the horror-thon.